Man, yeah, I'm glad we could connect. I've been looking forward to it for a while, and I know we kind of played back and forth, and then Jordan reconnected the dots for us. So I'm really glad he did. I actually listened to your conversation with him and caught a little bit of your conversation with Mike Ritland too. So yeah, I
Yeah,
love your
man.
story, man. I think it's very powerful, and I think a lot of guys will get some value from it for sure.
Thank you, brother. No, really glad to be here.
You were saying before I hit record, I wanted to make sure I got this in time, but you were talking about being in Jersey and kind of the epicenter of what's going on with this coronavirus. But I
Yeah.
think before I interrupted you, I don't want to lead or put words in your mouth, but it seems like you're going to say something about some of the challenges that you've done in the past and how it's prepared you a little bit for this or brought things into perspective.
Yeah, the one I was just starting to mention is not too long ago, a few months ago, I spent 7 days in pitch darkness, isolation, and silence. So just in a silent room, like tiny little room, pure darkness. And I went in there to confront my fear of stillness. What
Hmm.
had happened was, and the real trigger to push me there was about not last year, the year before last, I went through a very challenging divorce and went into some dark spaces after that. I ended up breaking my sobriety, and I didn't like that. And I when I break hard. So I'm talking downing liters of vodka, just drinking, a bottle a day for weeks on end. And I didn't obviously like that version of me. So I knew something was missing. And so I really wanted to go deeper within. At this point in my life, I'd already done a lot of stuff, right? So I wanted to go really deep within. So I found the most intense and extreme way to do that. And it was a profound, obviously intense and challenging experience, but profound, man. Incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I think about that. I'm like, I don't know if I can handle that because I'm here in my office and I've got, it's well lit and I've
Yeah.
got my computer and I've got plenty of distractions and I've got books and all the things I like. And my kids and my wife are just outside of the room here.
Yeah.
And even in this little box, I go crazy sometimes. I'm like, I got to get out of here. I got to go outside. So I can't even imagine what it would be like to just sit in darkness with your own thoughts, free of noise, free of any sort of stimulus.
Any
It just
stimuli.
yeah, it
Exactly.
just sounds I don't know, it sounds like one of the most challenging things actually somebody could probably do.
It definitely was. It ranks up there. Even from, running all the ultras, joining the Marines and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Because in this one, actually for the first few days in the darkness retreat, I was working out. So I was doing burpees and things like that. And then I
In the
realized
room, in the
in,
darkness, you're
in the
saying?
tiny
Okay.
room. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I realized that I was using that as an escape from the stillness because it's more comfortable for me to work out. I train a lot. I'm an ultra runner, but
And you
that
can
was
distract yourself with that a little bit.
exactly,
Sure.
exactly. So you can make time go by, you can distract yourself. So I actually set a rule that no working out. So for the last 5 days or so, just sat there. And the reason I chose darkness as opposed to the silent retreats, I don't know if you've heard of like those Vipassanas, the silent retreat
No.
that a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, some silent retreats. I'm not way familiar, but I've heard a little bit about it.
Yeah, those are much more common. I've heard people do that. But in a silent retreat, you're still seeing things. Your
Mm.
eyes are open. You're still seeing the world. With darkness, you have nowhere external to go. So your consciousness can't attach to anything outside of yourself. You can't look at a wall and say, that's a wall, right? So your consciousness has nowhere else to go but within. And that forces you into some very intense but beautiful places. For me, the stuff that showed up was, I had confronted a lot of my demons from the war, like the survivor's guilt. And I had sobered up, except for obviously breaking the sobriety, but generally had sobered up and confronted a lot of stuff. But what really showed up for me, kind of paradoxically in the darkness, was light and greater light and a feeling that it was okay to be happy. Because for a long time in my life, I was born to a good family in India, relative silver spoon in my mouth. And then I went out in the world, joined the Marines, and I've worked in leper colonies, worked with child soldiers, victims of sex trafficking, like seeing extreme poverty, really seeing suffering within and without, being in a war zone in Iraq as well. And so for a long time, I felt guilty for my life.
Mm.
Why do I get this? Why do I get this shit? What have I done to earn it? I was just born where I was born. Why does that other kid who was born in hell in a war zone, why did he get that? And so I've really struggled with that for a long time. And so kind of paradoxically in the darkness, I found, as maybe simple as it sounds, permission to be happy and almost recognizing that happiness is not going to change the fact that it sounds really obvious, right? But happiness is not going to change the fact that other people in the world are suffering. If anything, it will give me greater fuel to stay in the fight and to fight harder and fight longer, So
How do you reconcile that idea? Because frankly, that's never that thought of like, why do I get this? Isn't something that I can remember ever thinking. It is what it is, and it seems
yeah,
like if I do feel blessed. I feel like I've got some
Yeah.
great fortunate events, but I've always felt like, okay, well, it's my responsibility to make the most of these things. So I've never felt like you felt with like,
Yeah.
why do I get that? So I'm really curious how you reconcile the idea of I have all of this and there's other people who don't have any of this. So like how do you make the connection there?
I mean, like one very concrete example of this that really hit hard was right before the darkness retreat. A few months before that, I was running 167 miles across Liberia to help build a school out there. It was about a marathon a day for a week. So the first day I'm running, a profound experience, by the way, post-war Liberia. I mean, again, the country had been through hell, Ebola, civil war, poverty. I mean, at one point I was working with former child soldiers who've just seen the depths of human evil that, many of us can't even fathom. But anyway, so day one of the run, right? I'm out there running, and a lot of times these kids would come start running with me because say strange dude running on the streets, like what the hell is going on? Right. So they would come running with me, and there was this one kid, like these two kids, they started running. Blessing and Emmanuel were their names, and we started chatting, while we're running. And Blessing was telling me that he wanted to go to med school. The other kid wanted to go to vocational training school, and one of the kids, Blessing, I think he had lost his father in the war. His mother then left, and so now he was staying with the other kid in this tiny little village, right, in this middle of Liberia. The odds of them actually going to medical school were minimal,
Right.
And I remember in that specific moments, like as I continued running, because obviously when you run a lot, you have a lot of time to go into your head, right? So I was thinking to myself, like, what makes me different than Blessing? That was a really concrete moment that stands out in my mind that just thought, like, I was born to good parents in India who loved me, giving me a great life. He was born where he was born. And as a result, he went through hell, and his dreams, the odds of him actually achieving that because of where he was born was minimal.
Yeah. Could very easily have been you or me,
exactly,
or anybody who's listening to this podcast.
Exactly. So the way I now kind of handle it is like, and it may sound very simple, but it took me a little bit to really, and I sometimes still wrestle with this because to me also sometimes, and I'm not saying everybody should approach it this way, I think the guilt or the is fuel. Even my survivor's guilt has become fuel from losing a friend in the war. But like the feeling that I have to earn this life, to me, the shit that I would have, the luxuries are not just a right. They're not just a privilege. I have to earn it. So I earn it through doing some work in service of something greater. But I also kind of reconciled it by saying, look, this stuff is so much bigger than me, man. Who am I? I'm one tiny human being in the cosmos, right? How can I possibly, and whatever everybody's belief about God, the universe, this, that, and the other thing, I can't possibly fathom why I was born where I was born. So to your point, all I can do now is do something about it, man. Like earn this life, do something meaningful in service of the greater good, in service of our human family. And so I kind of stopped asking that question, and the darkness retreat was really helped unearth that. I mean, I wasn't as consciously aware of it. It helped unearth it. And then I kind of processed it, if you will. And now it's like, look, I can't explain that shit, but what I can say is like, I got to do something worthy.
You said that you broke sobriety. So I'm just trying to figure out the timeline.
Right.
How long were you sober for?
It had been a few years since. So what happened was, after I came back from the war, I was Marines, went to Iraq.
Yeah, what year was that you were there?
I went to Iraq in 2007.
Okay,
with the Marines.
So I was in Iraq. I was in Ramadi in 2005, 2006. So
Roger
it would have been after that. Okay.
Yeah, so I was in 07, 08 in the Anbar province.
Which is, we were in the Anbar
area
as well. Yeah, so.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, so I was there towards the kind of closer to the end of the war. And when I came back, struggled with life back home. Hated this world, wanted to go back to war, kept trying to volunteer to go back to Iraq, trying to go back to Afghanistan, just get back in the fight as much as possible.
What did you hate about civilian life? Or were you a civilian at that point, or were you still in the Marines?
I was in the reserves when I got back. So okay. I had about a year and a half left on my contract. So I finished, I had 1 year left in undergrad. So I finished my college degree, and coming back to college, man, like, at this point, I recognize that we all do the best we can with our level of awareness. So you can't blame a college student for not having your perspective after you've just come back from war. But back then, I wasn't as self-aware, let's say. So, you got college students whining about the dumbest shit, and you're just like, fuck, man, like, nothing. Like, and forget about what my own struggles in war. I mean, you've been there. War is obviously not easy. It's adversity. But like the people who suffered so much out there that you interact with, So you kind of, so that was one part that was challenging. Part of it was also just the guilt that, feeling like I hadn't suffered enough in the war. I lost a friend out there. I didn't get shot. I didn't lose any limbs. I didn't really why did I get to come back home? And I felt like I hadn't done enough. I hadn't, gone into hell enough, if you will. So I wanted to go back to get something, to earn something. I mean, truth be told, when I went to Iraq, I went out there with the very, putting it mildly, not the healthiest mindset. Like I went out there not expecting to come back alive. Like, so again, to give it some context. So right when I joined the Marines in 2004, I came to my unit and I got really close to a buddy of mine. This guy, Neil, we became really close, like brothers, trained together, did everything together. But whenever we trained, so when we ran the PFT, the physical fitness test, I would beat him by a few seconds on the run. Or on the rifle range, I'd beat him by a few points, So we'd always compete, stuff like that. We went to one Marine Corps ball. He had to buy me and my girlfriend a drink because I beat him by a few points, that kind of thing, right? And so we were the only two in our unit volunteering to go every chance we could get. Twice the Marines told us we're going, last minute they canceled it. And one summer, I was off in India vacationing, like, my family. I'm originally from India, so I was was visiting my family over the summer, and he finally ended up finding a unit to go with. And he was a good Marine, so he got promoted to corporal. As a result, he was in a seat that got hit with an IED, and he was killed. So I always felt like, man, I had no right to be off vacationing. I should have gone there with him. Had I been here, I would have been in that same unit. And, and I admittedly, I get rationally that I could have gone with him. He could have still died. I could have come back. But emotionally, it didn't change the fact that I felt like I should have gotten that promotion instead of him. And I should have been in that seat instead of him. So when I finally got my chance to go to war 3 months after he was killed, I was like, fuck it, man. If somebody has to, and again, naive, like I understand this is a very naive perspective on war because you can't control where bullets fly. But nonetheless, I went out there with the mentality that if somebody has to die, I'd rather it be me than anybody else. So I gave away all my shit. I was like, fuck it, whatever happens, happens. And again, that's not the healthiest way, obviously, healthiest. I mean, I wouldn't say it was suicidal, but it wasn't a healthy approach by any means, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel like you were unhappy with your current life at that point? Or was it more just, hey, I have to shoulder this responsibility? Or on the other hand, was it, I'm not happy with my life and this is a great way to go serve and fulfill all these other things. And, I'm not happy anyway. So if I die, like all's well. It was like,
No, it wasn't that I was unhappy. I loved my life. I had a great parents, great family. College was going great, good friends. Like I didn't hate life. I loved my life. But to me, I mean, even why I enlisted in the Marines in the first place, again, kind of going back and giving that some context, when I came to the U.S., I was about 13 years old and got pretty heavily soon into drugs, into alcohol right after moving here, about 15 years old. I mean, I was very self-destructive. I still have scars on my arm from cutting myself, burning myself, very self-destructive.
How did that come into play? I mean, it sounds like you came with your parents, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds like they were great parents. So like, did you just get in with the wrong crowd, or like, how did that come about?
When I moved at 13, at this point, I lived in Bombay, Bangalore, Singapore, and Austin. So 4 cities at the age of 13 years old. Good life though, but I was very lost, moving around, trying to fit in every place, trying to adapt in every place. Not sure who I wanted to be. I wasn't one of those kids who, entrepreneur at 7, started lemonade stand, that kind of thing. Like none of that. No clue who I wanted to be, no idea of my path. So, and I was always to some degree this kind of person who were pushing the lines. When I was a kid playing rugby in India, every time I would get cut, I would love my scars, as there was war wounds, I loved my scars. Or in Singapore, I used to run barefoot on rocks just to test myself. And so when I came into the US, again, very lost, so trying to fit in, trying to adapt. And I got in, again, I take responsibility for my behavior today, but as a young kid, you're very impressionable. So I don't blame my friends, but I got into a crowd that, my parents have asked me, what could they have done differently to prevent it? And truth be told, probably nothing. I mean, if I had gotten to a crowd of, let's say, ultra runners or mountaineers back then, I probably would have gone all into ultra running,
Sure.
So I got into a crowd, and I, being this kind of person who pushes the extremes, me and this one other guy were the first 2 in our group to start going into harder stuff. And he is no longer alive today. I lost 2 friends to drug addiction, and very easily could have been me. Did a lot of self-destructive things that could have easily killed me. What changed? And so what changed was when I watched the movie Black Hawk Down. You've seen it?
Yeah.
I mean, one of, incredibly powerful movie. And watching that scene where Gary Gordon and Randy Sugar, Medal of Honor recipients who volunteered to go on the ground to set up that defensive perimeter for Michael Durant, and they died and they sacrificed their lives knowingly that thousands of armed, enemy were heading their way. It just triggered something in me that what kind of human being would have that courage to knowingly put themselves, to sacrifice their lives for somebody else? And here I was living this, at this point, very selfish, meaningless, worthless existence, and that was the trigger. After watching the movie, I read the book Black Hawk Down and just started devouring book after book after book on military and life in combat.
And that was right before you went. That was before you went into the Marine Corps. Then,
yeah. So that's kind of what led to it. That was the trigger to, and so that kind of was giving the context about why I also had this mentality that, to me, like watching this movie, I mean, it was the inspiration to join was two guys who sacrificed their lives for somebody else, and that was, and reading book after book on. I mean, I remember reading this book, SOG, this Studies and Observation Group in Vietnam, these guys who were special operations soldiers, like they had more Medal of Honor recipients in that unit than I think any other unit in history. Just seeing the courage of men in combat, sacrificing their lives for others. It was, to me, like war to me, and I'm not saying this is sort of war junkie kind of mentality, but experiencing the edges of the human condition reveal the essence of the human spirit, if you will. Like war brings out the very best and the very worst of humanity. We see people do awful shit, right? Like atrocities, horrible things, but we also see people jumping on grenades to save their fellow human beings. And I wanted to go on those edges. I want to explore the lines after living great life. I mean, I kind of kid with my parents today that y'all made me soft by loving me, and giving me a good life. But I, again, never really suffered. And after that is when I started seeking out suffering in literally every context, within and without. But that was the trigger that got me in.
You're talking about being soft, but I'm like, I don't know. I mean, see this guy ultra running, marathons and greater than that, and then doing the silent thing. It's like you're like a glutton for punishment in a way, but it's pretty cool and interesting that you found significance and meaning in it. Because I think, well, that's what we do as human beings, right? We craft meaning around the experiences that we have, whether it's accurate or not, and usually it's not. It's just whether or not it serves us. Like, I think this means this, and I think this means that, and then you have to ask yourself, does that way of thinking or the meaning that you've attached to it serve you? And
exactly.
I know a lot of people, for example, who have gone through pain and hardship, and it will completely cripple them.
Yeah.
Because the meaning is, this is happening to me. I'm a victim. There's nothing I can do about it. It's not empowering versus, okay, here's some negative situations. And it sounds like from your perspective, you've taken those outside circumstances and said, okay, well, I'm going to attach positive meaning to it and actually use this as fuel to enhance and improve my life.
Yeah, but it took me a minute to get there. Like I had my fair share of victim mentality, I mean, even when I joined the Marines, so it took me about 1.5 years to get in because I have a blood disorder that 2 doctors told me would kill me in boot camp. So I had this blood disorder. I had flat feet. I have scoliosis. I'm like a genetic fuck up, So like when I first enlisted, now on one hand, I was going to go in the Marines no matter what. But I remember thinking back then, like, oh, shit, I'm never going to be that fit. I got this blood disorder. Basically, it transports less oxygen through my body. So I was kind of, victim, woe is me. And I mean, obviously I survived boot camp, but I ended up graduating infantry school as an honor graduate in my platoon. So that's when it started to shift. I started to say, okay, this is not a barrier. This is an opportunity. It's like today, I'm obviously, I'm an ultra runner. Just 2 days ago, man, I ran 50 miles around my cul-de-sac, so I do a lot of crazy stuff. And now having this stuff to me is just an opportunity to transcend the struggle. And that's what it's all about. And even after I came back from the war, though, I went through my woe is me phase with the drinking and all that, like a few years after coming back, that's when I was diagnosed with PTSD, struggled with depression. I mean, I was at a point, like I said, just drinking a bottle a day, and I mean, one morning after like 5 days of binge drinking, I woke up and was seconds away from picking up a knife and slitting my own wrist. And because I got in this mindset that, like life sucks. I didn't want to be here. I wanted to go back, just that whole victim mindset about my circumstances. And I had to go through the battle, like climb out of that abyss one step at a time to reframe my experiences, and even the survivor's guilt, to find meaning in that. And the guilt never went away. The guilt, now I've processed it a lot, but for a long time, what I did was I had a picture of Neil and me up on my wall, and it said, "This should have been you. Earn this life." And I used this as fuel to help me write my book, Fearvana, to finish it, to share this message with the world. But it didn't, the guilt didn't go away. Only very recently, a few months ago, that I changed it from "this should have been you, earn this life" to "honor his death, earn this life." Because the guilt was kind of going too far at that point.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, it sounds like it. When you were at that point, you were drunk, you were hungover, you're completely medicated on alcohol, maybe drugs, I don't know. And you were going to kill yourself at this point. Like what's the first thing that you did? Because if somebody looks at you
Great
now,
question,
they'd
yeah.
probably say, okay, well, this is a guy who's got some things figured out. This is somebody who has control over his emotions, who understands
Yeah.
how to harness fear. But that's a road, right? And so I think
Absolutely.
a lot of the times we just don't see it. We don't see like how you go from somewhere where you're in complete desperation and despair to the point where you want to end your life to,
Yeah.
hey, I've got some things figured out. So like, what is it that you did first
Yeah.
to build upon who you are?
Yeah, roger that. No, very first thing was the shock that the thought even entered my head. I mean, I had gone through the binge drinking session before, but never had I thought about, seriously considered taking my life. So it was just shocking that, holy shit, I entered a state where I actually wanted to kill myself. That was jarring. That kind of woke me out of the stupor, if you will. And very first thing I still remember, man, I walked upstairs, saw my wife in bed, and I was just this kind of shame that I couldn't
so you were married at that point.
I was married at the time.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
Yeah. We had a good marriage. I mean, I wasn't like abusive or anything like that. Most of my drinking would be sneaking at night, like for example, we'd be watching a movie together. Maybe I'd have a beer or two. And then she always knew I was always been kind of in a bit of night out. So she'd go to bed early. And that's when, I'd have bottles hidden under the sink, that kind of thing, And so we had a good marriage, but I was doing as much as I could to hide it. Obviously, eventually it becomes harder and harder as you go deeper into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember the very first thing was just seeing her in bed, sleeping there, feeling this kind of shame that I had hit such a low moment. And that was kind of the trigger that started my climb, because climb back out of the dark. But like to your point, it wasn't a smooth ride. I drank after that. It wasn't like that was the last time I ever drank. I slipped back down after that. That wasn't even the moment that I decided to go sober. I didn't even think about that. Like, it was just like, something clearly needs to change. At that point, I realized, the fact that I hit such a low. So what I started doing was going a little deeper into understanding my brain, researching neuroscience, researching psychology, researching spirituality. At this point, by the way, I was already seeing a therapist. I was seeing the VA therapist, because what inspired that was my wife and I was having physical issues, like sexually. I couldn't get it up, and it wasn't a physical issue; it was a psychological one. So my wife was like, "Let's go." Like find out what's going on, So we went to the VA therapist, and that's when we kind of started processing some stuff. That's when they diagnosed me and all of that. But I felt like that wasn't working. They were, great people, loving people, super wanting to help. Nothing but respect. But as I've come to learn through my own research now, just operating from a very bad playbook. The current models on mental health, in my opinion, are deeply flawed, generally speaking, for many areas. But anyway, so I started kind of delving into it myself, like studying neuroscience, studying psychology, studying spirituality. And it was this slow climb, because out things, understanding, like to your point, reframing meanings. I had to bring that stuff. I had to bring the darkness into the conscious, because I hadn't processed my survivor's guilt. I hadn't even really thought about, Neil. That shit was just buried, One of my favorite quotes that really summarizes this, Carl Jung says that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So most of us are like, that shit is buried back there, right? So now I had to bring it into the consciousness. And that stuff is dark, man. Processing that stuff is hard. It's intense, but you got to go into those spaces. He also says something beautiful and profound, which I absolutely love. He says, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. So you got to make that darkness conscious.
Right. You got to face it.
And I started doing that. Exactly. You got to face it. And I slowly but surely started facing it, had my slip ups. And for a little while, I actually learned to moderate alcohol. And then what would happen is I was kind of got okay with it, but every once in a while a trigger would hit and then I'd binge, and I'm like, finally I just realized, look, dude, you're not good at moderation. Right. Everything about my life has kind of proven that over and over again. So I was like, let's just stop this nonsense, and that's when I finally making the decision was the start. And then, shifting my habit patterns, creating a worthy struggle, as I like to call it, like having a path. I call it your worthy struggle, having that fight, having that war to still fight. That war might have been over, but the war never ends, man. Like there's always a worthy war to fight, So finding and living and loving that worthy war kind of became everything.
I like that. Yeah, I talk about life in the context of battle, it just being a battle. And it's funny because you hear people say, oh, what battle? What battle are you fighting? I'm like, everything.
Everything,
battle
exactly.
with my wife, the battle of raising my kids, the battle of coronavirus, the battle of growing a business, the battle of rejection, the battle of wanting to eat all the chips and salsa and ice cream and not doing it. Like everything's a battle. And I don't want life to be grinding, but what I appreciate about what you've done is taken it to the extreme so that, and this goes back to your earlier point about college kids whining about nothing. And I'm not saying all of them do. I'm saying the ones you had exposure to there. It goes back to that idea that it's perspective, right? Like if you had been to war, you wouldn't be complaining that your professor gave you a B because you turned your paper in 2 days late, right? That's not what you would be complaining about.
Yeah.
If you ran a marathon or an ultra marathon, you wouldn't be complaining about having to run, 100 yards. It's all about that perspective.
Exactly.
So it seems to me what you've done is let's take it to the extreme, mindset, physicality. That way, when I'm dealing with like real life, it's not going to cripple me. It's not going to derail me because I've already developed the fortitude to overcome these things that really aren't that big an issue.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. Like, to me, you venture out on these edges, you venture out on the extremes, and the extremes of all, like I call it this concept I call the paradox of singular duality. And the idea in life is there's all these dualities, right? Suffering and bliss, darkness and light, life and death, ego and humility, contentment and discontentment. There's all these dualities, and exploring the very edges of the human experience, of the human condition, pushing far into each duality allows you to then figure out where on that line you sit. So for example, I kind of realized in my life, I was taking the suffering too far and almost getting suffering unnecessarily in every area of my life. So I started delving more into the duality of play, doing lighter shit, like embracing that. And now I'm always going to be somebody who will venture more into the suffering side. But by exploring the edges, you kind of find out where you want to lie on those edges, but you can't find that out by being in the mundane.
You said the duality of suffering, but then what would be the
other side of that?
Yeah, duality. Play. Okay.
Play.
I just didn't hear you, so I was like,
Yeah, I call it play. You can kind of call it anything, but like every duality, the problem in life and the whole ethos of even Fearvana is a duality, right? Fear and nirvana, two seemingly contradictory ideas. They often are framed as opposites. This fear is something bad, but it's not bad. No duality is bad. Stress and recovery. You need both. You need stress just as you need recovery. But we live in a world that demonizes one side of that shit, right? Like fear is bad. Be fearless. Don't be scared. Don't stress out. Manage stress. Even ego. If you look at the duality of ego and humility, people say ego is bad. Ego is the enemy. And that's not nonsense. I mean, the best athletes in the world are the greatest examples of this. Tom Brady, when he was selected for the Patriots, he told the owner, "I'm the best decision this organization's ever made." Muhammad Ali used to go tell the world, "I'm the greatest." Like, you have to have ego. You have to own your greatness. And that ego is channeled with humility. Athletes are, again, a great example. They have the humility to be relentless learners, to say, I don't know this. How can I keep improving? How can I keep taking to the next level? So on all these dualities, it's not a bad or a good. There are ultimately no bad or good emotions or bad or good experiences. There's only emotions and there's only experiences. And we can do anything we want with them, to your point about creating meaning. So guilt, for example, everybody told me, don't feel guilty. To this day, guilt is a quote unquote bad emotion. But it's not, man. Like, my guilt was my greatest fuel, And then again, I took it too far, so I learned to kind of bring it back. So you got to explore the edges. That's why, coming back to external war is one thing, exploring the edges of the human experience. But even the internal war is where you find that those edges of running ultra marathons, or even that's one of the reasons why I go to these places, like working with victims of sex trafficking in India to former child soldiers in Liberia. You see humanity at the edges, man, and it's challenging because sometimes that darkness will stay with you, and you have to deal with that. But to me, it's like there's no better way to live than exploring the very edges of the human condition, man.
Yeah, well, not only that, it shows you what's possible, but I think exploring the edges, like you're talking about, let's take an ultra marathon. Yeah, it's not about the ultra marathon. I mean, that's good. And again, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but from my perspective, when I've done challenging things physically, emotionally, all these type of things, it isn't about the activity itself. It's about the lesson I learned using the running or the fighting or the whatever as a metaphor for everything else I need to accomplish in my life, all the internal struggles I'm dealing with.
Yeah, 100% agree, man. 100%. Every battle, like whether it be running ultras, skiing across ice caps, spending 7 days in darkness, it's all bringing the lessons, bringing new awakenings, it's like you got to stretch and then reflect. So you stretch and then you come back and reflect, and you take the lessons and you bring it into the next fight. But you're only going to gain an awakening when you stretch yourself outside what you currently know. You have to shatter the current paradigms, because what got you here is not going to get you there, wherever there is. right? So you have to stretch and then come back and reflect and apply that. Take in the awakening, apply to the next lesson. And so that's why I'm always seeking.
Yeah, I like the idea of reflection because I think a lot of people don't look at that. Like they take these quote unquote negative emotions, and I use quotations because we're taught, and I believe that there is nothing negative. It's just feedback for you.
Yeah.
Guilt is feedback. Anger is feedback. And then you got to figure out why you're guilty, why you're angry, and then fix it, right? But I think what people do is they'll do one of two things. They'll take it to the unhealthy extremes and they won't reflect on it and let it serve them. They let it hinder them, or they won't even acknowledge it at all. So like you hear things like, fear is false evidence appearing real. I'm like, no, fear is real. Like it's a real phenomenon. Like there's real things happening in your body and the chemistry of your brain that are causing, and if you're pretending like it doesn't exist, that's not helping you. Like you got to acknowledge it and say, okay, is this thing going to kill me? And if it is, then maybe you ought to avoid it. Or is this thing just going to make me feel uncomfortable for a period of time? And am I willing to deal with the uncomfort or discomfort in order to have some sort of benefit or gain on the other side of it?
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think to your point is that because the world feeds this paradigm on these bad emotions, quote unquote, people, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? People start to believe that they shouldn't feel fear because this, that, and the other quote unquote expert said, you should be fearless. Like I was talking to one dude once who said, I'm just waiting for the fear to go away so I can quit my job and start my business. And I was like, that's your problem, man. You're waiting for the fear. I mean, I can see your facial response.
You'll be waiting forever.
I was like, yeah, you'll be waiting forever. Like that shit is scary. Who cares? I mean, it's not about waiting for the fear to go away. Confidence, like I always like to say, confidence is the result, not the fuel. But we live in a world that creates all kinds of paradigms about how to be and who we should be and how we respond to the world. I mean, even look at PTSD, for example. There's this great study that Dr. Martin Seligman did, one of the leading researchers in positive psychology. He went into West Point and asked the cadets, how many of you have heard the word post-traumatic stress disorder? And it was 95%. Sure. And then he asked them, how many of you have heard the word post-traumatic growth? It was less than 5%. And what happens? We've created a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you probably experienced this, man, as a veteran. When somebody finds out I'm a veteran, and I get this coming from a place of love, but it's almost like this, oh, poor you. You're probably all kinds of fucked in the head. You know what I mean? There's this sense of pity, like poor me, that, woe is me. I'm poor veteran guy. There's this paradigm that's created that war equals disorder or trauma equals disorder. And in my own healing, I started to learn that post-traumatic stress does not mean post-traumatic stress disorder. Like survivor's guilt is a normal human response to losing people we love. It's not just veterans. Anybody who loses somebody we love, we often ask, why them, not me? Or being jumpy when there's loud noises. That's not a disorder. That's a normal human response.
A human reaction.
Exactly. I mean, I spent 7 months in a war zone where my brain said loud noises equals death. So fucking be ready. If loud noises comes, that could be death. But that they use those symptoms to say this equates to disorder. So simply by removing the label was one of the tools that helped me look like all this stuff going on is not a disorder. It's a normal human response. Because then what I can do is I can let go of the judgment attached to it. You know what I mean? The problem is not that fear. It's not the jumpiness of loud noises. It's then the judgment we get around that. By letting go of that, I could be like, all right, cool. This is just there. It's just normal. What do I do with it now? And reframe it.
I think that's the point. It's like, yes, you can let go of the judgment, and that's good because you aren't putting yourself under unnecessary scrutiny. Some scrutiny is good, but not unnecessarily. But it's the fact that you can actually move on, right? Because if I hear disorder, I'm like, well, I got a disorder. That's why I'm screwed up. No, maybe you're just making bad choices. It has nothing to do with your disorder. Maybe you're just dumb. Like you keep doing the same things over and over again, expecting a different result. And it has nothing to do with any sort of like disorder, but then you let go of that and then you put the power where it belongs, which is not the disorder. The power is with you. Okay. So intentionally, look, I think about stressful situations. I think about this conversation. If I don't change because of this conversation, even to the slightest degree, then like, I guess my humanity is gone. Like we all respond to everything. People listening to this podcast, whether they're going outside and going for a swim or a run today, like we have a corner here just outside. And there's a lot of accidents out there. Like if my kids don't see that and change their perspective about driving a car, I would question whether or not they're human beings.
Yeah.
Of course that's going to change them. And it should change you. You should take that stimulus and respond differently in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Like always be seeking that stimuli and then taking responsibility for that. Like to your point, you don't beat yourself up about the emotions you don't control, but it's not just becoming that victim and woe is me. So in the sense that, I like to call this the really a good way to kind of put a ribbon on this is something that I call the second dart syndrome. So Buddha once said that we're all stabbed by the two darts of suffering. So the first dart is the one I don't control. Like if I stub my toe against a door, the toe hurts. The second dart is the one that when I start saying things like, why do bad things only happen to me? This door is stupid. This house is stupid. God hates me, this, that, and the other thing. And we do the same thing with our emotions. So right now, if I'm sitting in this room and somebody shows up here with a gun, my brain's going to respond with fear. That's a healthy response to a dangerous situation, right? Now, the question is, that's the first dart. But what happens is many of us will feel fear. Like I've worked with people in various contexts. They'll feel fear on a simple hike. Or I worked with one guy who felt fear for traveling to Iceland on his own. First time just going on a lone vacation. Now, he was feeling fear. And the problem was he was judging himself. Like, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling fear? Because he maybe, let's say, compare himself to me, right? I'm working with him and I do a lot of these crazy shit, climbing in the Himalayas, all kinds of dangerous stuff. And he's like, you do that. I'm doing this. Why am I feeling scared? But the problem is his brain didn't have the references my brain did. Like when I went climbing with my ex-wife, it was a very simple climb. So I felt no fear because my brain I was a climber. My brain didn't perceive this as a risk. She did. So what happened was we came back from the climb. And after we were in the car driving away, she started beating herself up for feeling the fear. What's wrong with me? I shouldn't have felt fear. You weren't scared. And that's the problem. So you got to watch those second darts. I call it the second. So every time, feel the emotion, whatever it is, who cares? Like, I don't care if fear shows up now in any context. Fear, anxiety, stress, whatever. Let it show up. Then notice the second dart in response to that. And that's where you got to really take responsibility for that shit. Because we currently live in a culture where it is so alluring to be the victim, man. It is so alluring to be the victim. Because if I'm the victim, then, I got the disorder. I got this label that now this has been told. So I can't do this because of this, that, and the other label that's been assigned to me. And shit, man, like the victim mentality and this idea that, I can't do this because this person said I had this mental health disorder. And we get trapped in that because it's so alluring. It just feels comfortable. I'm a victim. That's why I can't do it. Because the other option is, shit, I got to take responsibility. And that's fucking hard, man.
It is. But, once you step out of that victim mentality, you begin to realize how repulsive it is.
Oh, I 100% agree.
And look, and here's the thing. When I say things like that, people are like, oh, you're not being very empathetic. No, that has nothing to do with the fact that there are genuine victims out there. I believe that there are. But what I have a problem with is somebody who, A, chooses to remain perpetually a victim, or makes themselves into some sort of victim or martyr that they're not.
Exactly.
That to me is a problem. And you're right. Somebody will always come in and rescue these people. And the other thing I see is there's this weird thought where people have begun to conflate victimhood with virtuous living. Like, if I come from a shitty situation or background, then I am inherently virtuous. No, you just came from a bad situation. The only thing virtuous is overcoming it, not coming from it.
Yeah. No, love the way you put that, man. Love the way you put that. It's what you do with it. Me and my Marine buddy were just talking about that the other day. Like, just going to war doesn't make you some fucking hero. And I don't claim to be like some hero by any stretch of the imagination either. We went into war after coming back, we had a very different perspective on, let's say, this, that, and the other medal or something. This, again, not to talk trash about veterans, obviously, but it's like, like just experiencing, to your point, the virtue is transcending the struggle, experiencing that and rising from it. And like, dude, some of the most extreme examples of this, I've seen these young women who I told you I work with, in India. Some of them are victims of sex trafficking or daughters of sex workers. I mean, they've been through hell and back, like raped multiple times, and these are young kids, like 12, 13, 14-year-old girls. It is fucking awful what they have been through. And some of these girls, man, like they've come out, like one of them is now a Zumba instructor. She's teaching Zumba to these young kids in slums in India, and like the smile she gets from teaching these young kids, and they are not victims in the sense that they don't let this break them. And to me, they're some of the most inspiring. I go there often to teach them Fearvana, but they inspire the shit out of me. Like, they have all the reasons in the world to be victim. They have seen at a young age what no human being should go through, man. Like, it's absolute the human evil at its worst, and they come out of that and say, I'm better off for this. Not to say that obviously we want that to anybody, but it happened. Now I'm better off for it, and I'm going to use that. And then the way they're using this to do all kinds of great things. Some of them have gotten scholarships in all kinds of colleges all over the world, teaching Zumba, going out there, starting like working with nonprofits. I mean, they're just some of those incredible human beings I've ever come across, man.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible to see individuals who have overcome just amazing and insurmountable odds in what they choose to do with themselves, and then see others. And look, I've fallen prey to this, is see others who come from a relatively good background, they never really had to worry about food or a roof over their head. And some of these people are the biggest complainers that we know. It's like, what are you complaining about?
That's the paradox of the world today, right? Because the things are getting more comfortable, softer, and easier. We're much worse than we've ever been. Like, there's beauty in struggle. We need to experience adversity. Evolutionary speaking, we lived in a world where survival was a constant threat. And now with this, there's this double-edged sword to not having to worry about survival. It's a luxury and a burden, because now you have the burden of pondering the existential meaning of why we are alive. And that leads us to all kinds of spaces unless we consume ourselves, to your point about the battle and the war. I mean, just like you said, some people, when I talk about things being a battle or a war, they're like, no, they find that too intense, right? That language. But to your point, it is a fucking battle, man. Everything is a battle. Our mind is going through internal battles, whether we like it or not. So you might as well make that shit conscious and seek out that worthy struggle. You know, that's the problem, is that we're getting softer. And I mean, everything about the culture, like everything, we live in a world that feeds the easiest way to get to the result. You'll see this shit like walk 14 minutes a day and get 6-pack abs, and it's missing the whole point. It's not even about the 6-pack abs. No. It's not about getting or all this shit. You've seen this online. Here's the quickest, easiest way to make $1 million. It's missing the point, man. It's about the struggle that gets us there. But the mentality is, how do we get there as quick? So we want the quickest, easiest path to get there. Right? Everything. Do we want the quickest, easiest path? The other day I was chatting with somebody, I think it was an interview, and somebody was asking me, like, he gave me a specific scenario. What if somebody going through a divorce, what would you tell them? And my point was, regardless of the scenario you give me any scenario, the fundamental problem is we are looking for the easiest way out of that scenario. We think when I get there, wherever there is, $1 million out of this divorce, whatever the there is, then I'll be happy. But you won't. You'll experience new problems. So I always like to frame it in the context saying progress is not the elimination of problems. Progress is the creation of new problems. So seek out new problems. Look for new problems, because they're fucking coming whether you like it or not. So embrace that. Seek it out.
Yeah, I think of it in the context of a relationship. Somebody who goes through a separation or a divorce and they don't fix the underlying issues. Well, you're probably going to get married again. And guess what? You're going to fall in love with this woman and you're going to get divorced again. And you're going to now what you're going to do is, instead of saying, what's wrong with me? You're going to start thinking all women are bitches and all women are evil. Yep. And then you're going to start externalizing like the lowest common denominator in all of your relationships, which was you.
Exactly.
You're the only one in common here.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, that comes back to, taking 100% responsibility, man. You always got to be asking yourself owning your world, owning your reality. Ultimately, there's only two things you can control. So just to simplify, you can control either your actions or your attitude. So always be looking at, what can I control here? Like in a war zone, which, you've been, we granted, we may have chosen to go there, but once there, I can't control my actions for the most part, in the sense that I could be dead tired and not want to go out on a mission. But if my major says, get your ass out there, you're going on a mission. You know what I mean? So sure. You don't have that freedom. But you can control your attitude. And I learned that even in Iraq. I was miserable for the first 2 months in the war. And then I said, look, I can sit here and bitch, whine, and complain, or I can just embrace that it is going to be what it's going to be and learn to love it, So right. You can control your actions or your attitude. So always be asking yourself, what can I control here? And if you're not in some extreme scenario, you have the luxury to control both more often than not. And if you don't, then okay, ask myself. So I always like to also say, so let's say, for example, of a divorce, I'm in a relationship that's not going well. I could either leave or go, or stay in this relationship. Now, either path is going to have some hardship. So the question to always be asking is, which struggle am I willing to endure? The thing is, it's not about which passion to follow. It's about which struggle am I willing to endure in any context. Quit this job I hate, or stay in it. Quit a job to start a business or stay in this job. Either path is going to have struggle. Which struggle do you want to endure? And then once you embark upon that path, ask yourself, what can I control? My actions and my attitude. But always bring it back to you. Always be bringing it back to you. And then once again, to give it some structure, as you're on this path of growth, there's only two ways to grow. So when you're doing this, always be looking for these two things. Find the problem, fix the problem, find what's working, and do more of it. So always be looking for that problem. Find the problem, fix the problem. As an example, as I mentioned 2 days ago, I ran 50 miles around my cul-de-sac. just going around this damn 0.05 mile loop, psychological
Dang.
torture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my legs were killing me. My legs were killing me, you know? Now, granted, there's going to be pain running a 50-miler no matter what. But I was looking, okay, what's the one specific problem? One gap at a time, because there's millions of gaps always in our lives. What's the one gap? Okay, you know what? I got to strengthen my legs. I got to spend more time doing single leg squats, single leg deadlifts, get in the gym more. Because I'm always going to choose running over gym time. You know, I love running. But now it's like, okay, that's the gap. So find the problem, fix the problem, and then find what's working and do more of it. So it takes a good bit of strength in my mindset to be able to run 50 miles around a 0.05 mile loop. I can celebrate that shit. I can own it. I can tap into my ego and be like, great, okay, cool. Now how do I take it to the next level? That's it. All growth is those two things, and keep looking for those two things.
It's interesting you talk about it in this context because you're talking about running versus the gym. And what it's reminding me of is that all of us are individual too. Like we have to look at this as an individual journey because for me, you're talking about running over the gym. I'm like, hell no. I would much rather go into the gym
Roger that.
than run at all. And I'm not right or wrong. You're not right or wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
I probably could stand some more running. You could probably stand some more, maybe strength training or something.
Absolutely.
Right? So it's all individual. But I do want to go back to something you said, and I'm taking notes here. And we were talking about hardship and how in modern times we just don't have it. This is why we need to manufacture hardship. Like you're talking about running across Liberia or whatever. 1,000 years ago, there was people, they were actually going across Liberia because they had to, right? To stay alive or to find some new place, or they were under threat of a neighboring tribe or a village. And now you're talking about doing it like for fun.
Yeah. Quote unquote fun.
But
exactly.
that is, you know what I'm saying.
No, totally feel you.
But let me say it this way. You're doing it not out of necessity.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Other people were doing it out of necessity.
Exactly.
So because we live in these relatively easy times, we need to manufacture hardship that other people may have just had to deal with out of necessity. They had to or die.
Yeah. I mean, I could not agree with you more. We got to seek out that war. You know, we got to seek out a war to fight always, because if you don't seek out a worthy struggle is going to find you anyway. We are going to go through struggle one way or another. But if you seek out a worthy struggle, now you're conscious, now you're pursuing it, now you're engaged in it. It's your fight. It's a fight of your choosing. And that's how you grow. I mean, the human animal evolves through stress. So we absolutely need to seek out that suffering. And that's where all the learning lies. And it doesn't have to be running ultra marathons. It could be anything. I mean, it's to seek out your own version. After joining the Marines, I started looking for it in every context. So I went mountaineering, I went ice diving, ice climbing, caving. I had diarrhea in a cave once after 12 hours in there. That was horrible. Spent a month dragging a 190-pound sled across an ice cap. So I was looking for, all kinds of ways to suffer, but it's in that you find the evolution. Not to mention, it also trains you to handle the suck of life, that life throws you curveballs, and now you're falling in love with suffering. The value in seeking out that suffering, seeking out that war, is it teaches you to build a positive relationship to it. And that is fundamentally the most important skill to master. Any other skill, the most important skill to master is a positive relationship with suffering. Because if you can suffer well, like that's my kind of mantra, is suffer well, then you can not only face the challenges of whatever you want to pursue, building a business, writing a book, running a marathon, whatever the goals you want to pursue, it will be struggle along the way. You can face those challenges, but you can also handle the suffering that life throws your way, because you will start to fall in love with the process of overcoming struggle, of engaging struggle, as opposed to looking at it as a barrier. And this kind of leads to another context about how our modern world is shaped. We look at the pursuit of happiness as an ideal, and that causes us problems, because when we're looking at pursuing happiness, struggle and suffering becomes a barrier to the way of that happiness. Instead of pursuing happiness, pursue meaning. Pursue meaning. What is your mission? What is your worthy fight? What is your worthy struggle? When you pursue meaning, then suffering is not a barrier. It's not an impediment. It's not an obstacle to that thing. It's a part of the adventure. It's incorporated into the adventure. It's a learning part of the adventure. Whereas if you're only looking to be happy and comfortable, then any kind of suffering is a barrier to that. And that's why we struggle with suffering. But if you view it differently, now suffering, you fall in love with the suck. You embrace the suck, as we all say in the military.
Right. Yeah. No, I like your distinction of happiness, because you did use the term happiness in your book, Turn Fear into Health, Wealth, and Happiness.
Yeah.
And I actually wanted to ask you about that, because I agree with your last statement, is like, I don't want to be happy. Like I don't want to be happy, because when I think of happy, I think about, like, I don't know, frolicking around on the
Yeah.
beach and like, and I don't know, whatever, like things
No, I
that
feel
just
you.
don't really appeal to me. I want to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
And and I know, at least I've defined it this way, that in order to find fulfillment in my life, I think you would probably say meaning, maybe they're synonymous in the way we're
Yeah.
talking about it,
Yeah.
is that there has to be suffering. There has to be
Yeah.
a villain or an enemy or
Yeah.
a dragon or however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Because you can only find the meaning or the fulfillment in overcoming the hardship or slaying the
Yeah.
dragon, or again,
Yeah.
however you choose to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
How
No,
do you know
100
if something's worthy though? How do you know if it's a worthy struggle? Because there's all kinds of things that we could do and participate in, and people are asking me to do this and do that. And
Yeah.
like, how do you know if this is something worthy of your time, attention, and energy?
Great question, man. Part of it is you're going to learn along the experimentation me journey of life. I mean, there are those people who, like, I have a friend, she's super young, under her 20s, and she's about to become a grandmaster in chess. She just knew it at an early age. Good for her. Awesome. Like, best wishes. So some of us knew it. I didn't have clarity on my Fearvana path till I was 33. I joined the Marines wanting to go career Marines. That plan obviously changed. So to some degree, the experimentation of life will take you along that path. And you'll figure it out. You'll get there as you figure it out. But another great way to figure out is to look for references around you, because our brain is always operating in references anyway. So look at other people, look at the world. I mean, from a young age, we're learning from the world around us, right? So look at the world. Who are people who are living a way you would want to live? Like, work backwards from the future. So start with looking at the lifestyle. Who are people kind of living the lifestyle you want to live? And, so some people, let's say, for example, you might want to travel a lot. Or other people don't want to travel. They want to be at home with their family. Again, no right, wrong, good, bad about it, but you look at how are people living? Who are people living a kind of lifestyle? And you start looking at wherever you are on your journey, however old you are, start by thinking about things you don't want, because it's often easier to know what we don't want than what we do want. So we start plugging off. Okay, I don't want to run across fucking countries like Akshay, right? So I don't want to do that nonsense. So
Yeah, I fall into that camp for sure.
Roger that.
Yeah.
So you scratch that off, right? And then you start, once you kind of have some sense of that, you start looking, okay, what do you do? What are things I do want? And then you start looking, who's doing that? Who are people kind of living that lifestyle? And then you can look at, and I would start and really get structured about this. I would start looking at, okay, what kind of jobs, quote unquote jobs. And I put quote unquote because for a while I wanted to be a mountain bum, which is not a job per se, but I was going to be I was looking to be a sponsored mountaineer and a mountain athlete,
That sounds cool, actually.
Yeah, there was multiple reasons, which I'm happy to get into, why I didn't choose that path. And I still mountain climb, but I didn't choose to become a sponsored mountaineer. I didn't work hard to pursue that path. So anyway, but you can look at people who are doing that and then start looking what roles will get me there. Then you start looking at those roles. You find out from those people, what are they doing? How are they doing it? Why are they doing it? How do they think? What do they believe about the world? Like, dig deep into the mindset of these people to understand, and then start pursuing a path, or look at, okay, if these are my, let's say, 3 paths now I've narrowed it down to, I'll start asking yourself, which struggle do I want to endure? So each path is going to have some struggle. Being a sponsored mountaineer would have been a struggle. Spending a career in the Marines would have been a struggle. Now doing what I am doing now is a struggle. Which struggle am I willing to endure? And once you get some sense of that, so this is where it's like constant stretch and reflect, right? You're going to experience it. You have to go out there and do it too. Like, whatever it is, you got to go out there. Like, you can listen to me on a podcast. You can listen to us. You can read a book. That shit might provide sparks, but you got to get there and take action. And because the greatest lessons are in the doing. Like, I could have read all the books in the military I wanted, but only by joining the military did I learn about that life, right? And what it was. So you have to get out there and get into the doing, and then you'll start learning. So stretch and then reflect, and then figure out, okay, is this the struggle I'm willing to endure? And fall in love with the struggle, and then become obsessed about that path. Another thing as you start pursuing it is to really get clarity on who you are and who you want to be. I believe there's immense value, like companies do this, is have mission statements, vision statements. So have a personal mission statement, have a personal vision statement, have a personal philosophy. Like, I learned this from this guy, Michael Gervais. I don't know if you know him. He has a podcast, Finding Mastery.
Yeah,
awesome dude.
I know the name, but anyways, keep going.
Yeah. So he also was like the mindset coach of the dude who did that Red Bull space jump,
Oh, really?
Yeah. He's Michael Gervais. Awesome dude. A friend.
I'll have to check it out. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing guy. So anyway, he talks about how he helps people he works with create a philosophy statement. So one statement, one line under 25 words or less, his model, which I really like, he says is, if somebody comes up to you in a dark alley and with a knife saying, tell me your philosophy, you should know it like that. So my philosophy, for example, is the path to inner peace is the pursuit of a worthy inner war. That is my philosophy. That's the ethos of what I believe. The path to inner peace is the pursuit of a worthy inner war. And you can see it. It stumbles off that's who I am. So when you have that stuff narrowed down, and this comes over time, you might not know it. If you're listening right now, but like, I don't know what mine is. It gets refined as you go into the journey.
Most people, myself included, haven't
thought about that.
It.
Exactly.
So why would we have
most people?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Most people haven't. But getting clear on it has immense value, because now that becomes your North Star. It becomes your compass. So I can ask myself, did I pursue a worthy war today? Did I do something in pursuit of that worthy war? Right. And then you have that, the philosophy, I have a mission statement, all of it. And that's kind of how you start to get a sense for it. And once you know, like today, now I know this is who I am, and nothing is going to change that. I'm that clear, because I've also experienced a great deal of life to get me here. Right. Mm-hmm. And now you gotta become obsessed and pursue mastery relentlessly on this path, and embrace the suck of it, embrace the struggle of it. And it doesn't mean it's always a struggle. I know I talk a lot, obviously I've probably said suffering and struggle, God knows how many times right now, but you balance that shit out with recovery. It's the duality again, right? So you balance the stress with the recovery and the play, whatever that looks like for each of us.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. I think what people are tempted to do is to dismiss what you're saying, because it requires some effort. It requires time.
Yeah.
People are like, well, no, really what I was looking for is the 3-step formula where in the next 30 minutes, I'd know my life's purpose.
Yeah.
That would be lovely,
Yeah.
but in my maybe somebody's found it. In my experience, and it sounds like yours, that there is no 3-step formula.
Yeah.
It's basically explore a bunch of stuff and then evaluate whether or not you like doing it.
Yeah, at its very core. And like to your point, like some people might know it. I mean, we have those friends. I mentioned this one. I have another kid I'm mentoring, 14-year-old kid who's a NASCAR driver. The dude's like been racing since he could walk,
Is that right?
He's going to be like, I guarantee he's going to be one of the best. You're going to hear his name. The kid's a legend. So he knew it at a young age. And like, that's awesome. So if you do, great. If you don't, that's also okay. It's not a bad thing. Like I said, I didn't know my path really till 33. I have absolutely zero regrets. So
and not only that, but a lot of people look at their time. So I'm 39 now. I just turned 39. And I think a lot of people are tempted to look at it and think, okay, well, I wasted 39 years of my life. No, 38 years of your life were leading you to where you are now.
Exactly.
And you can't, like, let's say you feel like you're on the path, like you're doing what you need to be doing, you're on track, or you're trying to get on track. You wouldn't be there if you didn't have the previous 38 years.
Exactly.
So none of that time is wasted. It just gave you a new perspective, and it's all preparing you for, as cliche as it sounds, the moment that you're in right now. Everything has been preparatory for what you're doing right now. 100%,
man. I wouldn't be here talking to you about Fearvana and doing what I'm doing with Fearvana had I not gone through all this life experience to get me here, So I'm damn grateful for all of it. And it's part of the journey, man, part of the adventure.
Well, let's do this. We jumped into it pretty quick today. And I feel like we've danced around like Fearvana and what it is. Yeah. But as we start to wind things down, how do you encapsulate the Fearvana mindset? And I think that'll put a little package on what it is that we've talked about for the last hour or so.
Yeah. How I define it, if I had to sort of put a one sentence definition to it, is Fearvana is the bliss that results from engaging our fears to pursue our own worthy struggle. So the fundamental idea of Fearvana is to help people develop a positive relationship to suffering so they can find, live, and love their worthy struggle. And if you think about it, that's life, right? Like find, live, love, and love your path. So helping them find it, live it, and love it. And that's why I call it a worthy struggle. But it starts with developing a positive relationship to the experience of struggle and suffering. That's kind of the fundamental idea. And through all this life experience, it's those dualities again, these two seemingly contradictory notions that I had come to learn were very complementary. And fear is not the enemy. Fear, you have to go through fear to experience nirvana. You have to go through darkness to experience light. And perhaps one of the coolest examples of that, actually, to kind of come back to this, was when I came out of the 7 days in darkness. After coming out of 7 days of darkness, they put a mask on me. They took me out to sit on the deck, and this was in Germany, so gorgeous black forest, sitting there in mask. Finally, you take off the mask, and obviously the light kind of hits you. And it was such a profound experience. I started tearing up with how hard it hit me in the most beautiful way. And two kind of thoughts went through my mind. One was, I wish I could look at the world every day through these eyes. And the other was this like deep knowing of feeling so grateful for every bit of suffering I'd ever experienced in my life, because I realized in this very visceral way that you cannot look at the light that way. You cannot see the light that way unless you have been in the dark. And that was this visceral understanding of it after being in dark for 7 days. The world looked I mean, I can't even describe how the world looked
I can
after
only
that,
imagine.
you know?
Yeah.
And you think about, obviously that's not just literal, but figuratively and metaphorically, like you can't understand the world, you can't understand the light unless you've been in the dark. And so helping people kind of navigate that duality and embracing the darkness, not just like eliminating the demons. You can actually make your demons work for you, you know? And a quick story about that too. I mean, when I was running across Liberia, day 4, I had this aching pain in my shin. It just kind of hit. I would think I was 17 miles into the run that day. And I stopped to kind of massage it, put some cream. It wasn't going away. So I started limping for about 1.5 miles. And I was like nervous, right? Because I still had a lot of miles to cover for the next 3 days. I was like, so just kind of struggling with the physical pain and the psychological battle. And then I started jogging a little bit. And then after jogging, I started just sprinting, like booking it. And the whole time I'm saying to myself things like, remember Neil? It should have been you that died in the war. Suck it the fuck up. Earn this life. Look around you right now. People are dying. People are struggling in extreme poverty. Who the fuck are you to quit? If you quit now, you deserve a coward's death. And just saying this dark shit about how I should have died, how I shouldn't be alive. But man, that 5 miles was the fastest 5 miles I ran the entire trip. Now, I'm not saying I always talk like that to myself because that's some dark shit. But the point is, when you engage your demons, when you engage the darkness, you can make both work for you. There are other times where I talk in a beautiful way, like, you know, celebrating myself, looking at the grandeur of life, gratitude, all that good stuff too. But you engage both, and then you can choose how you want to use both on the path, on your mission.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're just using it as a tool. Like it's a tool. It's inanimate, really. I mean, if you look at a hunk of metal that's formed into a hammer, that's just metal that was at some point mined from rocks in the earth.
Roger that.
Now we've shaped it, we've honed it, we've refined it for a purpose, and we're using it as a tool. It's an inanimate object.
Yeah.
No, and you can use it incorrectly, right? Like I smashed the shit out of my thumb the other day, and you know I used the tool incorrectly, and it was painful. On the other hand, my daughter, I've got a little playhouse we're building out there, and I struck that nail with the hammer and I built it, and she looked at it and she was excited and I was proud. And so I used the tool correctly, right? It's just a tool. Use it correctly or smash the shit out of your thumb.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Exactly. Because those tools can send you to some dark places if you're not careful.
Well, let me ask you a couple of questions. One, I meant to prepare you for, and I overlooked it because we jumped right into it. The question is, what does it mean to be a man?
Love that question. To me, to be a man is to be a warrior, not that victim mentality that we talked about, but to be a warrior who knows and lives and loves that worthy war he is fighting. You know, he's fighting that worthy war. And if you don't know it yet, you're at least seeking it out. So a man means to be that warrior, to embrace the dualities, because a man is also someone who can turn that fight off. There are times to be in the fight, right? Like, I mean, you mentioned you were hammering something for your daughter. If you're playing with your kids, that's not the same person you are when you're in a war zone. So a man knows which mask to wear when he is on a particular mission. You know, the father mask, the husband mask is different from the I'm in a combat zone mask. You know, a man isn't somebody who comes in and beats some kid or beats his wife or some shit and takes it, you know, hurts somebody weaker than them. It's knowing that this is the mask to wear when you need to fight it. And it's like you're fighting that worthy war in service of something greater. Ultimately, it's in service of something greater. You know, I think it's in the Bible or Shakespeare, that quote that greater love hath no man than he who sheds his blood for me. So you're fighting for that mission in service of something beyond you, you know, fighting for something greater than yourself. I think it was even Martin Luther King who said, if a man hasn't discovered what he wants to die for, he isn't fit to live. Right. And I'm not saying you got to fight like in combat. I mean, not saying you got to die for the mission, but, you know, have something. It could be your family. It could be the men you're fighting within a war zone. It could be your tribe, you know, whoever, that you're fighting for something, fighting for a mission that's bigger than you and transcending yourself. To me, if I had to like summarize one word what life is about, and somebody asked me that once, what is life about in one word? I would say self-transcendence. So a man is like fighting that war in transcendence of himself in service of something greater with that warrior ethos.
It's powerful, man. I like that you're talking about it in the context of the mask, because a lot of times when you hear mask, we hear things like mask of masculinity and there's a negative connotation with it. I'm like, it's not wrong to behave a certain way. It's not wrong to be stoic. It's not wrong to be principled. It's not wrong to be empathetic when it calls for it. It's not wrong to be stubborn when the situation calls
Exactly.
for it, right? So
yeah, man. I mean, because you're going to be different. Like, you're going to be different when you're playing with your kids than when you are. I mean, if I'm in Iraq, or like if right now I get into a firefight or some shit, I'm going to be this hard ass, you know, like, even when I'm running. Now, if I'm playing with my little puppy, I'm this soft little, you know what I mean? Like, I love my puppy. Or if I'm going on a date or something, I'm not going to be this hard ass, like talking to myself, like when I'm running across a fucking country or something like that. You know what I mean?
The only thing I would say though is that, and I, like, maybe let's riff on this for a second, is that it's not manufactured though. Like, for example, for me, when I'm playing with my daughter, like, it's not a mask to the point where I'm making it up. Like, I genuinely am compassionate and empathetic and kind when I'm playing with her. And then when I'm on the mats training jujitsu, I'm not manufacturing aggression or violence or dominance. Like, that actually is part of me. I want to compete. I want to be physical. I want to dominate another individual. It's not manufactured. Like, it genuinely is a part of who I am.
Dude, totally 100% agree. You can think of it like Kobe Bryant. You know, when he was going through some shit in his personal life, he created the Black Mamba as this alter ego to step onto his battlefield, the basketball court, right? So when he stepped on it, and this is a great interview, he talks about, he's like, when I step on there, when I'm when I've entered that world, don't talk to me, don't touch me. I am in that fucking world. Like, he is this in the zone. So yeah, that's not manufactured. That's all. We are all different selves. It's all that duality, right? Like, we're different selves. So when I step onto X battlefield, I am that person. It's not that I'm faking my compassion. It's not that I'm faking it, but you're just being the ego, that version of you, what the situation calls for. You do not want, like, a Navy SEAL that's fighting in combat, or a Marine or Army dude or whatever in war, is not going to and should not be the same person who's playing with his kid at home. You know what I mean? It's not, and it's not that it's fake. It's that we're both that person. Right. We're both these different versions. We're all these different versions of ourselves. And the key is being conscious about it. So it's not, it happens, and you can choose it when you need it. It comes back to what we're saying about the darkness, the light, the demons. You can choose what, and that requires awareness, right? This relentless process of awareness. I can choose to be, one of the things I do is I create triggers. So for example, right before coming on this conversation with you, what I do before any interview I do, I have a trigger that I watch this end scene of Black Hawk Down. Where he talks about, he's like, you know, I don't know if you remember, but the end scene, he says, you know, people ask me when I go back home, why do we do it? And the guy says, they don't want to understand, but it's about the men next to you. That's why we do it. That's why we fight. And I watched that scene to remind me, why am I here? I'm here talking to you right now because if it touches one damn life, that's what matters, you know? So I put myself in that zone. So creating triggers to activate, it's like Pavlov's dogs, you know, like Pavlov's dogs. He rang the bell and the dog started to salivate when the bell rang, even if there was no food. We can do that same shit with ourselves. Use music, use anything to say, okay, now it's, and I do this. If I'm in I have like songs that I use music as a trigger all the time. So I'll have a song that puts me in soft zone or put me in intense zone, you know, whatever it may be, to activate the different mask, if you will. Not like, and you said, like, it's not manufactured. They're all me, but it's all aligned. And that's why, coming back, sorry, I'm going to rant because I love this stuff too, but but like, it's all aligned with my mission, right? My philosophy. So it's all part of that same version of who I am. Right.
It's good stuff, man. All right. How do we connect with you? Learn more about what you're up to?
Fearvana.com. Social media is Fearvana. You can find me on Instagram, YouTube. All of it is at Fearvana.
Right on. We'll see. And
the book is also on Amazon. And I especially want to mention that because all the profits in the book go to charity. So we've supported these young girls who are victims of sex trafficking to former child soldiers. And the book is on like Kindle, Audible, paperback, all that good stuff.
All the places. Right on.
Yes, sir.
We'll make sure we sync it up so the guys know where to go. Akshay, I appreciate you, brother. What a great conversation. I've been looking forward to it, and the conversation did not disappoint. So
thank you, sir.
Thank you for spending some time with us.
Appreciate you.